Spartacus is a 1960 epic film directed by Stanley Kubrick. In 1st century BC, the Roman Empire is amassing slaves to perform its labor. Spartacus, a slave, is bought by a slave master who wants to use him as a gladiator. Spartacus trains, all the while dreaming of freedom. As a way of keeping his slaves in good spirits, the slave master offers Verinia to him, but Spartacus disobeys his masters and refuses to rape her. Spartacus and his comrades revolt, and soon form an army of slaves, freeing more and more of their kind as they try to journey out of the Roman Empire. Spartacus and Verinia meet again and fall in love. Roman politicians plot against Spartacus and his army of slaves, and after a series of battles and political maneuvers, Spartacus is defeated. Most of his army dead, Spartacus is captured and eventually crucified by the Romans to set an example for those who would try to gain their freedom in the future. This is an extremely abbreviated version of the events of a 3-hour and 16-minute film, but those are the basics. Spartacus employs a lot of foreshadowing early in the film, and if one pays close attention, the ending is given to the audience in the beginning. As the film winds down, Spartacus and his good friend Antonius are forced to fight to the death. Spartacus kills Antonius only to spare him the victor's fate, a slow, agonizing death on the crucifix. This is foreshadowed in the beginning. Spartacus has a short conversation in which he tells his friend Crixus that he may be forced to fight him for their slave master. They debate whether or not they would be able to kill one another. Then, about 3 hours of runtime later, Spartacus must do just that with Antonius. Also, the opening narration references Jesus Christ, the rise of Christianity, and the fall of the Roman Empire, all of which take place long after the events of the film. This was actually insisted upon by the Catholic Church's National Legion of Decency. The reference to Christ foreshadows Spartacus' crucifixion. Furthermore, it paints Spartacus himself as a kind of Christ figure, trying to lead his people out of bondage, and eventually sacrificing himself so that someone else would not suffer. It's hard not to see Christ parallels when someone is literally dying on the cross, though.
Goodbye, my love. My life. Goodbye.
Spartacus is a well-remembered, much-honored film. It won 4 Academy Awards and the hearts of critics, and yet, out of everything in Stanley Kubrick's oeuvre, Spartacus is the least Kubrickian. It is more conventional, which I admit is an odd thing to say about a massive enterprise as a 3-hour sword and sandals film. By modern standards, that is quite strange, but this is very much a part of old Hollywood. The film within a film in the Coen brothers' most recent work, Hail Caesar, is a Roman epic that also ends with the crucifixion. It is the most obvious example of old Hollywood to use in that film to let the audience know exactly when we are. But Kubrick, in many respects, was not old Hollywood at all. He had different ideas about what we should be seeing on the big screen in the 1960s. He had virtually nothing to do with the screenplay, and clashed with the writer, Dalton Trumbo, about the titular character, claiming it was preposterous that he had no faults. Yet, under the right magnifying glass, there is more Kubrick in this film than one might see at a glance. The Roman politicians echo some of Kubrick's later works. Groups of pampered, high society white people. Noel Thingvall once called these Kubrickian characters socially acceptable fools, and would populate his later films like Dr. Strangelove, Barry Lyndon, and others. High-ranking or wealthy people with nothing better to do but find new ways to be horrible. Much of the film is both shot and edited in conventional 1960s Hollywood fashion, but it is structured well. Some of Kubrick's trademarks turn up, like the single-point perspective shots and composition shots, rolling against many visual elements. It's a good-looking film, and in hindsight, maybe he should have been more proud of this accomplishment instead of trying to distance himself from it. The virtue of mercy is a critical element of the film. When Spartacus is selected to fight Draba, the African slave refuses to kill Spartacus and shows him mercy, even knowing what that could potentially mean for himself. Draba dies for his efforts, but Spartacus learns an important lesson in mercy. Later, once he has taken over the slave compound, he spares the Romans and insists that the slaves do not force the Romans to fight to the death as they had once did to them. Later still, Spartacus spares the life of a Roman general and allows him to leave and tell the Roman Senate what has happened. At the end of the film, he kills Antonius, but it's what could be called a mercy killing. In doing this, it spares Antonius the far more painful and slow death on the crucifix. Even though Spartacus has been mistreated his entire life, he does not allow anger to overtake him. He shows genuine mercy, even to his enemies, leading by better example. This gives the film a moral core. Compare this to the 21st century equivalent to Spartacus, Zack Snyder's 300, and the difference is clear. Leonidas accepts a messenger from the Persians into his home. When he does not hear the words he wants, he murders the messenger. The film frames Leonidas as our hero, a protagonist for whom we are meant to sympathize and cheer and hope for victory. But in this early act, we learn that he is as much a monster as any other. We are just meant to root for him during this scene because strength alone is somehow portrayed as a virtue in this film rather than responsibility. Why have a noble hero when you can generate a tired internet meme? Framing is important. If a filmmaker frames a protagonist's personality flaws as obstacles to overcome, then we can have a layered character. Like a character that starts off selfish, but becomes heroic by the end. But if a disgusting character's revolting flaws are framed as cool, then it's just not the same thing. Kubrick took issue with Spartacus having such a good heart, and maybe it is unrealistic, but I side with Dalton Trumbo's vision of allowing the audience a glimpse of nobility and showing us the difference between inner strength and meaningless bravado. In fairness to Kubrick's vision, it was not only realism that he wanted. He and others who had influence over the picture, including both Trumbo and Kirk Douglas, had differing views on what the film's message should be. Kubrick said, "In Spartacus, I tried with only limited success to make the film as real as possible, but I was up against a pretty dumb script, which was rarely faithful to what is known about Spartacus. History tells us that he twice led his victorious slave army to the northern borders of Italy, and could quite easily have gotten out of the country. But he didn't, and instead he led his army back to pillage Roman cities. What the reasons for this might have been the most interesting question the film might have pondered." Kubrick went on to say that maybe Spartacus was not as merciful as the film made him out to be, and frankly, Kubrick was probably right. Human beings are rarely so perfect. But that brings up a question. Do we show the benefits of mercy by portraying merciful characters? Or do we spotlight the benefits of mercy by showing horror? Not glorifying it like in the aforementioned Snyder movie, but condemning it. The fight between Kubrick and, well, everyone else, was that Kubrick wanted to portray Spartacus as a lesser figure, and Trumbo and others did not. It's more complicated than that, and entire books have been written about this, but that's the long and short of it. Kubrick wanted to show far more graphic violence, as well as corruption by both the masters and the slaves, and force the audience to choose between them. Some of his ideas were shot down, and others were filmed but were later removed by the studio. Kubrick's politics infused into the film would have made for a radically different Spartacus, and while some might argue that it would have been better that way, keep in mind that Trumbo and his side had their own entirely relevant politics and messages to showcase. Trumbo's script drew parallels between the Roman slave revolt and the civil rights struggles of the 1950s. Draba, the African slave, is one of the most noble characters in the film. There is voiceover narration in the film that references slavery being abolished roughly 2,000 years after the events of Spartacus. Trumbo was blacklisted by Hollywood for refusing to name names to the Joseph McCarthy-era House Un-American Activities Committee. He originally wrote the script under a pseudonym but was later given a proper credit due to the interference of Kirk Douglas. Howard Fast, author of the historical novel upon which the film is based, actually began writing it in jail due to his own refusal to name names. This is referenced multiple times in the film. Once when the Roman general Crassus, the antagonist of Spartacus, displays a list of the disloyal. The film's most famous and iconic scene, slaves refusing to turn over Spartacus to the Romans, is widely seen as a message of solidarity among those who were blacklisted.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
In spite of Kubrick's own politics being pushed aside, the film still ended up being intensely political. As I said, this is one of the only times in his career in which he had very little influence over the film. But quite frankly, Spartacus was not his story to begin with. This was deeply personal for Howard Fast and Dalton Trumbo. No matter who won the battle between Trumbo and Kubrick over the politics of the film, Spartacus was going to be highly political one way or another. It was never going to be shallow, regardless of whose vision came out on top.